Somebody once said, "We don't need no education." That person was clearly not our next speaker. Of course, the way to find out about a speaker is Google. And Googling Michael Cohen brings up 221 million results. And yet, incredibly, the first one is Michael Cohen. Unfortunately, Donald Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, is sitting in jail and was unable to join us this evening. But in all seriousness, we are very fortunate that within our circles we have somebody as passionate and vocal about education as our guest speaker tonight. He's been in education since the age of 5 and has made great strides since then. His first position was head of Northwest London Jewish Day School, and from there he became principal of what was then the largest Jewish school in the world in Melbourne. He then became the director of the London Board of Jewish Education, running and setting up many schools within the US framework. He was an innovator in Kiruv, establishing Family Week long before Seed, JLE or Aish had taken a foothold in the London Jewish community. Recently though, one of his key focuses has been fighting Ofsted to ensure that we continue to have religious freedoms within our curriculums, something that is a serious threat to Jewish education throughout the UK. It gives me great pleasure to ask Mr. Michael Cohen to speak.
Firstly, good luck to you all. Welcome with you. Firstly, I'd like to thank those responsible for inviting me to join you and participate in this Simcha. I understand not only Melava Malka, but the Siyum. And I'm very honored to have been asked, and I'd like to thank those members of the Shul, committee, whoever, who invited me. One person particularly I want to, I've got his name here somewhere. That's not that one. Hold on a second. I've got it there. Just a second. No. Oh, here it is. Yeah. Ari Cohen. Thank you, Ari, for inviting me and giving the opportunity to share with you some of the more interesting and probably not so well-known aspects of a long career in education. Let me start off by saying that I was one of the very fortunate youngsters who actually went to a Jewish school, primary and secondary, at a time when it was not fashionable to do so. I was one of the fledgling pupils of the Avigdor School in North London, where my parents lived. We grew up. And I want to say, people say that the best days of your life are your school days. Well, I endorse that because I had a fantastic time at school. Didn't learn much, but it was wonderful. And I always said it was the closest I ever got to a Jewish Butlins holiday camp. It was absolutely tremendous. The spirit, the atmosphere, the activities outside of the classroom, fantastic. And I want to share with you one interesting story. The school started by a well-known Rabbi Dr. Solomon Schonfeld, Zecher Tzadik Livrocha, a remarkable man, who, as we well know, was famous for his rescue activities during and after the war, personally being involved in the saving of more than 3,500 Yidden. And he set up schools, one of which was the Avigdor School. Those of you who knew him will remember a man who never took no for an answer. He wasn't concerned about authority. As far as he was concerned, he was authority. He ran his schools like that. And while I was at the Avigdor Grammar School, he appointed a gentleman called Mr. Crispell as the headmaster. Mr. Crispell was a former major in the British Army, not a from man, Jewish, but had very little connection with Yiddishkeit. The purpose of appointing Mr. Crystal was, as Dr. Schoenfeld put it, to create a Jewish Eton. And to do that, he had to have high standards in Limudei Chodosh. And Mr. Crystal was brought in order to achieve that. And he was a man, having grown up in the army, was a disciplinarian second to none. I won't go into the story of what happened, but Dr. Schoenfeld and Mr. Crystal fell out. To the extent that Dr. Schoenfeld one day simply sacked Mr. Crystal. Dr. Schoenfeld really couldn't do that because the school was part of the state system. And although Dr. Schoenfeld was the principal of the school, he really didn't have the authority to sack a state employee. And so eventually he went to court. He went to high court, actually. But that's not what I want to tell you about. I want to tell you about a morning when I was 14 years old and I walked to school, which was 5 minutes away. And standing outside the school, I noticed a number of our pupils. As I approached, the head boy, a boy called David Miller, remember him well, came running up to me and he said, "Are you for or against Crystal?" Just like that. Well, of course, when a Jewish person gets a question like that, he immediately asks the question back. And so I wasn't sure what the purpose of what was going on there. So I said, "Well, what difference does it make?" And he said, "Well, if you're for Crystal, we're on strike." Oh, what does that mean? We're not going into school. We're out here and we're not going into school. What are you going to do? Well, let me ask you, ladies and gentlemen. You're a 14-year-old boy who's given the opportunity of not going to school and staying outside or going into school. What do you answer? I said, "I'm for Crystal." Right, stand here. And I had to line up with everybody else. Within half an hour, the newspaper reporters are at the front gate with a photographer taking pictures of all of us. The staff, as they arrived, told everybody to get into school. And David Miller was saying, "Don't listen to him! Don't listen to him! Keep standing here! Keep standing here!" And this went on, and we were all utterly amazed, not quite sure where this was leading to. The staff went back into school, and the crowd at the front was now nearly 100. There are 100 pupils out there being taken photographed by the newspapers, which ended up, by the way, in the local Hackney Gazette on the front page, with a major article about school on strike. So, I had a day off. Next day, we all had to go back to school, and the register was taken. And each teacher would say, they call your name, "Where were you yesterday?" Now, if there would have been a Guinness Book of Records in that time, I think one of the insertions would have been, the local dentist has a record of having seen more than 100 pupils in one day, amazingly all from the same school. That was the story of the evicted school strike, which to my memory has never been repeated. So if any of you here are governors of schools, you might want to bear in mind this can happen on your patch. I began my career as a lawyer, believe it or not. I started off in a legal profession, and I took a decision in my late 20s, very late 20s actually, about 4 o'clock I think it was that time, in order to move out of law. Now that was a stupid decision from a financial point of view, especially when I decided to go into Chinuch. But I'll tell you something, looking back on that career, it was the best decision I ever made in my life. I know there are some lawyers sitting here, and I don't want to in any way demean the tremendous work that you people do. Shysters, all of you. Apart from that, I think it's a great profession, but it just wasn't for Michael Cohen. I decided I wanted something a little bit more interesting, unusual. But in fairness, I have a young brother who's a lawyer, as you know, And I think in my time it wasn't easy to be a lawyer and work as a frum Jew. Today it's a lot easier. Most of the interviews I had as a lawyer, as a prospective lawyer, as soon as I mentioned that I need Friday afternoons off, that was the end of the interview. There was no job. And that went on from place to place to place. Today you couldn't get away with that. But in my day, that's the way it worked. So I ended up in a very small firm in the West End, not very exciting, and so I decided the legal profession will manage without me. Motzei Shabbos is a time when people normally tell stories, Melava, Malka. I want to share with you some of the interesting stories that have occurred to me in my own Chinuch career. In 1975, I was invited to go to Melbourne, Australia. The reason I went was because they gave me a free ticket. And I thought, when else would I get a chance to visit Australia for nothing, having no intention of ever settling there? I was headhunted by a gentleman, doesn't matter what his name is, but he happened to be the principal at the time of what was then the largest Jewish school in the world, the famous Mount Scopus Memorial College, which at that time had 2,400 students, going from the ages of 3 to 18. An enormous complex. I've never seen anything like it in my life. And I went there. I could tell you, regaling the stories of that alone, but I want to just tell you one thing. What fascinated me was, I spent a few days having a look at the place, because I had to be sure that my family and I, and the only family I had at that time, was this little kid who was 6 months old, he was called Ari, and he spent his first 5 years, 5.5 years, if you like, almost 5.5 years, in Melbourne. You wouldn't believe it looking at it, but he's nearly an Australian. And at his home he's got one of his hats with corks on it. What fascinated me was that as I went around Melbourne looking at the Jewish facilities, I was amazed that a place like Melbourne had so many Jewish schools. When I inquired as to the percentage of children from Melbourne, Jewish children who went to Jewish schools, I'm talking about, ladies and gentlemen, 1975. 82% of all Jewish children in Melbourne went to Jewish schools. In London, in Britain at that time, we were somewhere between 25 and 30%. This shocked me. If anything I saw in Australia that absolutely bowled me over, it was just the numbers of children who went to Jewish schools. And then I began to dig further as to why, and I discovered why. Melbourne was built by Holocaust survivors. People who escaped Europe came to Australia and decided that they were going to defeat Hitler in their own way. And that was by building up Jewish life. And they realized from day one, there is no Jewish life, no Jewish future, unless there's Jewish education. And so they built schools, one of which was Mount Scopus College. And as I got to know the school better when we went back, and we were there for 5 years, looking at the registers, it was amazing how many surnames ended with ski, Polish. Thank you. And as I got to know the parents better, their own experiences of Europe had made them so determined that Jewish education was going to be for their children. And so they sent their children in droves. In droves. My school had 2,400. There was a school in the centre of Melbourne, 1,200. They even had a Shalom Aleichem school there, if you've ever heard of that. A school where they're only teaching Yiddish, and not one single pupil is frum. It was a cultural school. They wanted to preserve what Hitler destroyed in Poland. The only Jewish school I know that was open on Yom Kippur. They didn't keep anything, nothing religious, but they wanted a Jewish identity. So they opened what was called a Shalom Aleichem school. Those of you know a little bit about Jewish literature will know Shalom Aleichem was a famous writer, poet, Polish poet. This was my beginning to opening my eyes to a Jewish educational world. One of the most, probably the most fascinating experience that I had was opening a school in Budapest. I was invited by some Americans to help them to open the first Jewish school in Budapest since the war. You probably realise Hungary was the last country the Germans entered, February 1944, virtually when the war was virtually coming to an end and they were going to lose, but they decided their determination to wipe out European Jewry was such they didn't care. And so from February 44 till October 44, they managed to exterminate 600,000 Jews from Hungary in the space of a few months, which was half the population of Hungary at the time. When the Russians took over Budapest, which they did, and carried on until past 56, the Hungarian Rising, and then of course they came to 88, the Berlin Wall collapsed, and the Russian Empire collapsed. And suddenly, the Eastern European world seemed to be free, and people could begin to express themselves. And one of the first things that happened was Americans decided to see what they could do to try and revive some Jewish life in Hungary. The Skolana Rebbe, President Rebbe's father, was very much instrumental in bringing together a group of people, and I was one of those, in order to try and develop a school in Hungary, which we did. Again, this is weeks and weeks of stories, but I'm going to just share with you just a couple of stories. Firstly, the school opened on the 3rd of December 1990. 3rd of September 1990. We had no idea how many children would turn up. I was responsible for setting up the school, putting together the number of rooms. The famous Reichman family, who had originally come from Hungary, bought the building. And Mr. Reichman said to me, a remarkable man, Albert, one of the nicest people you could meet, he said to me, Michael, he said, how many people do you need to open a school? I said, if we get 50, we're in business. He said, fine, there's the money, not to me, here's the money, you've got it, open, do what you need to do. I got teachers from Israel, I got materials, I got the building ready, we got everything ready for 50 kids. In those days, because of the communist regime, nobody applied. You didn't fill out forms, nobody signed anything in Hungary in those days. You just waited. We put a notice in a newspaper that said, a Jewish school will be opening on the 3rd of September 1990. Any boy or girl between the age of 5 and 15, please come at 8:30 on that day. I stood on the door, waiting to see who would turn up. Ladies and gentlemen, 456 children turned up on that day. 456. They were like ants coming out of anthills. You saw them just coming to the school. Remember, the vast majority were already at school. They were between the ages of 5 and 15. Why they came is another story. I'll tell you about that another time. But what I want to tell you is we had major halakhic problems because we didn't know who was Jewish, who wasn't Jewish. We were running Shacharit services. Boys were putting on tefillin. Were they Jewish? Were they not? I don't know. Brisim? That's another issue. Didn't know what to do. So, my very good colleague, David Moskowitz, a Skolana Chassid in New York, went with me to see Rashach. We went to Bnei Brak, and we had an appointment to see Rashach to ask Shilas, what do we do? I was very nervous, meeting with the Gogol, the door. We came into his room, and there's a little man. The couple was almost as big as him. He was sitting at a table, a rickety table, and all on the table was one sefer and a bowl of fruit with some grapes and a couple of apples and I think an orange. And he sat there, thick, if you remember a picture of him, thick black glasses. And we walked in and sat down. He put up his hand, Shalom Aleichem, sit down. We sat down, photographers of course, snapping away there, make sure you all got your memento. And David, my colleague, explained to him our problems. And he said, we have a school in Hungary which we opened. To my amazement, he knew about it. And he went on to explain our halachic problems. What do we do? Do these boys put tefillin on? We don't know if they're Jewish. Can we count them for a minyan? all the sort of issues that nobody thinks about in our normal life, we have this problem. Rav Shach closed his eyes, and there was silence. Now, I thought he dropped off to sleep, because it seemed to me eternal. We would just sit here, I don't know what to do with myself. I'm looking at this little man, eyes closed, and he was he was early in his 90s. And waited and waited, I didn't know what to do. But, Kovadarab, you sit, you wait, and you wait, you wait. Eventually he opened his eyes, and he turned around, he said something, I could not believe it. He turned around and he said the following. He said it in Yiddish, but I'll say it to you in English. He said, any boy or girl who claims that they're Jewish, you accept them as Jewish. In 5 years' time, we will look at it again. This is a man about 93. He obviously had great siyata d'shmaya. He was going to be there in 5 years' time. That was his answer. I was astonished. I naturally thought he'd say, well, you can't, this, that, impossible, they're not Jewish, da, da, da. Nothing like that at all. And that exactly was the story with Rav Shach. So we started the school and we ran it. One of the problems we had, of course, was the brising. We started teaching them Parashat Shemot. We came to the story of bris, Milah. And the teachers told them quite honestly and sincerely, if you don't have a bris, you're not really Jewish, not fully. I knew what the outcome would be. There would be certain boys who might want to have a bris. So we decided at the leadership of the school that anybody who wanted a bris, we would organize it for them as long as they get their parents' permission. That means a written letter confirming the agreement that we couldn't start telling boys to have bris. And that's what happened. So any boy who brought back a letter signed by the parents, we would organize it. Rudy Stern, you've probably heard of, Rudy Stern, of course, he would come over every so often and he would do multiple brising, if you like. It was done in a hospital, of course, he got older boys. One little boy came to me, he was 11 years old, and he said to me, Mr. Cohen, I would like to have a bris. I said, lovely. He said, here's a letter, you take it home, send it to your parents, and get them to sign it, and then leave it to us, we'll organize it. This boy was a single child, lived in a small flat, not far from the school. He came home, and he shows a letter to his father. Daddy, I would like a bris, could you sign it? What? I'm not signing a bris. Please, Daddy, I want to have a bris. No, I'm not signing a bris. Why not? He says, don't you know what happens to Jews? What do you think the Germans did? How do they know who was Jewish? I'm going to let you have a bris. No way, not my son. Not at all. Oh, please, please, please let me. He begged his father. His father said no. Kid comes back the next day. Same thing. Begs his father, please, Daddy, let me have a bris. I told you yesterday, there's no bris, don't talk about it. This kid, 11 years old, he wouldn't give in. And he was pestering and pestering, to the extent that the father lost his temper. And he schmeissed him. He said, don't you talk to me again about this? And he really schmeissed him. The kid came to school the next day with marks on his face. I saw it. I didn't say a word. All I said to him, is everything all right? He said, yes, I fell down. He was protecting his father. Kid went back home, begged. The mother was a softie, and she said to her father, to the husband, let him have a bris. Go on, he wants it. I'm not letting him. My son's going to go around for the rest of his life, identified as a Jew? No way. Kid wouldn't give up. This went on, my right Rabbi's side, for 6 weeks. The kid was beaten black and blue. And every day he would come back to the mother and father and beg and beg and beg. And each day the father would beat him more. I went to the school row, I didn't know what to do. The row said, don't interfere. You've got to see how this plays out, don't interfere. And it hurt me to see this kid come to school every day, like he'd been knocked over by a car or something. One day the kid comes back, he goes home, he asks, the father can't take it anymore. He says, I've had it up to here, you want me to sign the letter? I'll sign it. He signs the letter and the mother signs. And the kid turns around to the father and he says, Daddy, thank you, but one thing, please have a bris with me. The father went berserk. He smashed this kid. Don't you dare talk to me like that. And the kid would not leave go. He kept on and on and on begging his father to have a bris. The father said to the mother, I can't take it anymore. He's driving me mad. In the end, what happened? The father broke. And he said, okay, don't say I didn't warn you. You want a bris? Have a bris. You want me to come with you? I'll go with you. And the two of them, vayelchu shnehem yachdav, both of them went to the hospital and they both had their bris. The day after the bris, I go to the hospital to visit and I see the boy in the bed. And I look at Baruch Hashem, everything was fine. Next to the bed to him was his father. I didn't know it was his father because I met the father. So the son says to him, this is my father. The father calls me over. He says, are you Mr. Cohen? I said, yes. He says, I want to say something to you. What? I want to thank you. Thank me for what? Thank you for what you've done for my son and for me. I don't know what happened, but I feel a different person. I just feel a different person, and it's thanks to you. And I said, nah, not thanks to me. You thank this little kid next to you, a remarkable little child. What he suffered and went through to get this bris, not many boys would have done that. You have a gem. Treasure it. It'll give you a lot of nachas. Because I've got a limited amount of time, I can't go on to too many stories, but I'll tell you another story, very quickly. The Budapest story hit the headlines in many newspapers all over the world, particularly in Israel. The president of Israel heard about it. There was a presentation on behalf of the school, etc. And a community in Prague heard about it and got in touch with me and said, I understand you opened a school in Budapest. Would you open a school in Prague? I said, possibly. I went over to Prague. I met some people from Prague and I began to talk to them. I knew nothing about the community in Prague, except it was much smaller, a few thousand, not like Budapest. Budapest had 60,000 Jews at that time. This was small, 3,000–4,000. So I began to ask questions. Are you sure you really want a school? How many children have you got? Where do they come from? What kind of Jewish life do you have? I asked a multitude of questions. After half an hour, a lady in the group says to me, excuse me, Mr. Cohen, can I ask you a question? So I said, yes. He says, you've asked all these questions, but you haven't asked the right questions. Here was I thinking I knew about education, and here was this lady going to tell me I wasn't even asking the right question. So I said to her, madam, with great respect, what is the right question? She said, the right question is, how could it be that you can't have a Jewish school in your town? Wow. She already looked way ahead. It's not possible for Prague to survive Jewishly without a Jewish school. There's no question we have to have a Jewish school. Why didn't you ask that question? Why don't you have a Jewish school? Not ask her where we go, this, can you afford it, etc. And this woman taught me an important lesson. Sometimes we educators don't realize perhaps the more important questions are being asked by the others. When I met the community, I ran a 3-day seminar to try and help them understand about Judaism and Jewish education. There were about 50 people who turned up. I would say that 48 of them were probably between the ages of 16 and maybe 35. There were 2 elderly people there, a husband and a wife. And they fascinated me, because I never saw any old people in Prague. They'd all been wiped out. And yet these 2 were there, clearly in their 70s maybe, I don't know what. So at the end of the seminar, I went up to them and I introduced myself and they introduced them to me. And I said, if you don't mind me asking, how is it that you are here when nobody of your contemporaries are here? She says, yes, they've all been killed. Well, how did you survive? She says, oh, well, we survived in the most amazing way. Because of Jewish education. Because because of Jewish education. He said, well, tell me. He says, well, when the Germans opened Theresienstadt, the concentration camp, an hour away from Prague, they wanted this to be the concentration camp that would be an example for the whole world of how good the Germans are to the Jews. So this was going to be a camp that the Red Cross would visit and would therefore go back and say, all these stories about extermination, killing, brutality, they're not true. We've just been to one, a model place. So they opened a school in Theresienstadt for children. Probably the only school I've ever heard of in a concentration camp which actually functioned as a school. They needed teachers, and this couple were chosen to be the teachers of the school. Now, as they were telling me the story, my eyes were watering over because I thought it was an amazing thing. They survived because they were teachers. Then they started to say to me, I said, what was it like? Like? Can you imagine? You're a teacher, Mr. Cohen. When you walk into a classroom every day, do you know your children? I said, oh, you have a register? Sure. You take the register? Sure. We don't. We never did. You know why? Because we never knew which children were going to be there that day. Just disappeared. They were killed. So every day they just filled up with a few more children. We never got to know the children we taught, because they were never the same children. And we went through that experience for 4 years, never knowing who was going to turn up or what. So here was people, Jewish education was being carried on in the most unbelievable circumstances. Let me move to one more place before I finish. I received a phone call from a gentleman called Rabbi Shmuel Kamenetsky, no relation to the Shmuel Kamenetsky, the Rav in America. He was a Lubavitch Shaliach, as they called him, Shluach, in a place called Dnipropetrovsk, which is in the Ukraine. He heard about Budapest, heard about Prague, and said to me, we have a school, but we need guidance and help. Could you come along, have a look at it, and perhaps see what you can do to help us? I get on a plane, change at Vienna, because Dnipropetrovsk, any been there? I thought every hand would go up. I never heard of it myself. I got there, and this is the story I must just share with you. You got on a plane in Vienna, little plane, 20 seats, no more. And this plane is, this was in May, flies over, goes into Russia, and suddenly the announcement on the plane is, we are about to land. I look out the window, I can't see a building for miles, and we're going to land. All that I can see is miles and miles and miles of snow. And the plane lands in the middle of nowhere. And there am I with 20 other people on a plane, and plane stops, we take out the little ladder, and off we go down. I'm about 3/4 of the way in the queue, and as we go down, I see at the bottom of the ladder, of this sort of steps, two very, very strong soldiers with guns. And in the middle between them is this very large Russian lady with boots and a kind of a uniform. And I'm looking at them and I'm thinking, doesn't look good. Doesn't look good here, I don't know. It got worse. I go down the stairs, and as I get to the bottom, the lady walks forward and she says this, Michael Cohen? I said, yes. Come! And she turns round, and the two guards go behind me, and they march me off. But in the opposite direction to everybody else. So everybody else is going one way, goodness knows I couldn't see to where, and I'm going this way, goodness knows to where, because I don't see a building. Now, if you've ever been in a situation where you really are petrified, this was it. I really thought the end had come. You hear about stories. People go and they're never seen again. And I'm walking behind this fat lady with these two guards with guns, and we're walking, I don't know where, we're walking. And I'm thinking, you know, what's going through my mind? My wife, children, all the things I've done wrong, I didn't have a chance to do this. And your life goes in front of you. And we're walking, and I'm looking back, and I'm seeing the other people further and further in the distance. And I'm on my own with these three very unfriendly looking people, two of them with guns. So I imagined, then I see we're coming to a hut. That made me even nervous, because you know what happens. Put you in a hut, shoot you, leave you there, nobody will find you. And we go to this hut. And as I get closer and closer to this hut, really I'm shaking like anything, and they're not talking, of course. She's marching very, very forcefully, and I'm slowly following her after me, not wanting to get too close. And then I see, standing on this hut, a gentleman with a long beard. Rabbi Shmuel Kamenetsky turned out to be. Well, I mean, I didn't go up and kiss him, but I was very, very tempted, because he was a fellow Jew, and I thought, this is fantastic, somebody can tell the story. And he puts out his hand and he says, Shalom Aleichem, Baruch Habo. Well, I was so pleased to see this man. And he takes me in, and I said to him, excuse me asking, he said, what is this place? He goes, this is the VIP lounge. He says, all the others have gone there, they've got to go through all the documentation, and you, don't worry, you come with me. Rabbi Kamenetsky had a very good name in the Propetrovsk, and he was allowed to go through and to take me all the way through. That was one of the most horrible moments of my life, which turned out to be actually quite interesting. The school itself was fascinating because Propetrovsk is an unbelievably poor place. I actually walked over dead bodies in the street as I was walking, doing this. So I shouldn't touch them. People died on the streets out of starvation, cold. Nobody buried them. They just lay there until somebody eventually would pick them up. And it was awful. They put me in a gorgeous hotel. I couldn't believe it. It was a lovely hotel. It was warm, big, but they treated me very, very well. But I came to the school, and I discovered to my surprise there were a few hundred children in this school. A few hundred children in a Jewish school. So I said to Chinuch, I said, with these children, were local people? He says, absolutely. I said, it's amazing. How have you got so many children? He says, you know how? Come here. He takes me into the dining room where the kids are having breakfast. Every kid there is sitting there, 400, 500 of them, eating breakfast like they've never seen food in their lives. You see this? This is repeated at lunch. This is where they have their supper. They come because they hear they can eat. They've got no food at home. They've got no food at home. So the school has to provide food, medicines, clothes, holidays, everything. Provides everything for them. When I went to shul the next morning, I'd go into the shul, there's about 40 men there. I'm sure of the 40 men there wasn't a frum man amongst them. Here they came. Again, I said, why? He goes, look, have a look in that room, see? That's the breakfast laid out for them. That's why they come. They come for the breakfast. And that's what kept them going. And this school provides what we consider the most ridiculous necessities, life, the ordinary things, medicine. This man, Shmuel Kamenetsky, was constantly shelling money out. Every time we try to have a conversation, there's a knock at the door and somebody's standing there, please, Rabbi, I need money for pills, I need money for this, I need money for that. It was pathetic to see. And that's what this man was doing. Let me finish with one final story. I'll go back to Hungary. It's a story that actually was picked up by Pesach Cohen in one of his books, and when Rabbi Cohen phoned me, because he wanted to confirm it, I told him the story, and he put it in one of his books. It's an interesting story because it concerns a family of one boy who came to our school in September 1990. We started 2 weeks before Rosh Hashanah. 3 months later was Hanukkah. We had to teach the children very quickly everything. They'd never seen a sukkah. The only thing that kids seemed to know was that Jews don't eat pork. That was the one thing they seemed to identify as being Jewish. Everything else, Shabbos they didn't really know about, Kashrus they definitely didn't know about, and all the other Yom Tovim was an eye-opener to them. We came to Hanukkah, and I decided every night of Hanukkah we would invite the parents for Hanukkah lift, and we'd have a little masubah. And on the Tuesday evening, I made an announcement that all the parents of year 4, 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds, whatever it was, would they please stay behind? I would like to have a short meeting with them. Fine. About 30 parents congregated in a room and sat down, and I said to them, I'd be very interested to know why you send your children to this school. They've all been at other schools. Why did you send your child to this school? I'm giving out a piece of paper and a pencil, and please write down what you have written. We will read out what you've written. Gave them a few minutes, and I went round the room. Why did you send your child to the school? I said to the first person. He said, well, the school my child was at was very anti-Semitic, and I heard it was a Jewish school, and I wanted my child to be amongst Jews. Standard answer. Second one, I heard the standards here were going to be very good in secular. I want my son to grow up, he wants to go to be a doctor, and I'm hoping he'll be in America, so I'd like him to have a good education. We went round the room. The oldest man in the room was a man in his 50s. Came to him and I said, well, sir, what have you written? He said, Mr. Cohen, I've written nothing. Like that. Oh. I said, why? Why I send my child to this school? I can't write. I sent them maybe a story. I said, well, are you able to tell us? He said, I'll try. And this is what he told us. In 1944, I was a kid of 7. And my parents and I, we knew what was going on. They were rounding up wherever they could see Jews. They were simply rounding them up and taking them to the station, and off they were going to Auschwitz. So people very rarely ventured out if they were Jewish. One night, I'm in my room, and I'm hearing a conversation going on in the kitchen between my parents. And the mother is saying to the father, what are we going to do if the Germans find out we're Jewish? We'll be taken away, what will happen to our son, etc., etc. And both the father didn't have an answer. Then after a few minutes, the boy's listening to this, and they don't know he's there, outside the door. Then suddenly the father says, just a second, what are you getting so upset about? If the Germans come, we'll deny it. We'll say we're not Jewish. Anything here to prove we're Jewish? Nothing. Well, don't we? Good Catholics. And hopefully they'll leave us alone. The mother turned around and said, but what about this? And she gets a chair, climbs up the chair, goes to a cupboard, opens a cupboard, and peeks out a book. And she says to her husband, but what happens if they find this? What is it? What is it? This is a siddur. Siddur? Where did you get a siddur from? This siddur was given to me by my mother the day we got married as a wedding present. And she got it from her mother on the day she got married, and her grandmother got it, etc., etc. Every wedding in the family received this siddur. And that's why I've got it. So the father says, well, if the Germans find the siddur, we're finished. The woman takes the siddur in her hand, and she's standing next to a fire, and she throws the siddur in the fire. Kaput, finished. The little boy is watching this through a crack in the door. He doesn't understand what it's all about, but what he does know, something terrible has happened. He goes into his room, throws himself on the bed, and cries and cries and cries. This is the father telling the story to us. 50 years later, he says, the father, telling all of us, I see a notice in the newspaper, and it says there's going to be a Jewish school. So I decided I'm going to send my child to this school. And then he looks at me and he says, Mr. Cohen, do you know why? Because in this school, my child will get a siddur. We all broke down in tears. It was a very moving story. Let me finish, if I may, just leave you a message. I could Lots and lots of different things have happened to me, but I've learned a number of very important lessons, which I'd like to just share with you very briefly. Firstly, if you want to get into education, or anybody who is in education, there's an element of Mesiras Nefesh, which in my view goes way, way beyond anything else. Most people, the Mesiras Nefesh, they do it for themselves. When you're a mechanech, or when you are teaching, or when you're working with children, you're doing it for somebody else, you're doing it for children. There's a Mesiras Nefesh which goes beyond the norm of a Mesiras Nefesh. Secondly, Jewish education is not a quick fix job. It's a very, very slow, tortuous, sometimes numbing process of working bit by bit by bit. I'll give it the following explanation for you. The word Chinuch has a gematria of 84, which is exactly the same gematria as daf. Daf is a page, because Chinuch is about one page, and then another page, and then another page. We know from Daf Yomi. Another page, and another page. You don't educate children in Chinuch overnight. It's years and years of slow, grinding, tortuous work. And that's the only way it works. And if educators go in to school thinking they're going to change it overnight, they're going to be extremely disappointed. It's slow progress. And the final thing I'll say is, and this is a message to parents, I'm sure all of you have children in schools. Unfortunately, and this is not a British phenomenon, I've seen it happen all over the world, there is a tendency amongst parents to always talk about what's wrong with Jewish education. Very rarely do we talk about what's right. There's so much right with what's going on in Jewish education, even in our own community, and we don't see it. We are so besotted with what's going wrong and what's not good, and the complaints. Of course there are. You're entitled to complain, and you're entitled to gripe if you have to, and you're entitled to recommend and have concerns, as long as you don't forget there's so much good going on, and sometimes if you put the good next to it, you think, sorry, complaining about this is not even worth it. Look what's happening to my child. They're with Jewish children, they're getting a good chinuch. It may not be the best in the world, and I'm the first to admit, from having travelled the world, British education is not the best in chinuch. That's for sure. I was mentioning it to the Dayan before. We'll never create in this country what I call a top school. We're just not cut out. British people don't work that way. We are always happy to be in the middle. That's our style. I always say if you go into a room and there's a speaker, and imagine every nationality is going to pick their seat where they're going to sit. You know who sits at the front? The Americans. Always. They go to the front room, the front row, because that's where they think, that's my place. You know, sitting in the back, the Japanese. They're quiet little people, they sit at the back. British, we're sort of in the middle. We'll sit there, too far, not too far back. That's our style. So we'll never produce the great schools, Jewish schools that are in the world. It doesn't matter. But I'll tell you something. If America can boast the best Jewish schools in the world, there's a small percentage of them. Most of them are rubbish, and I've seen the rubbish. I can tell you that. Our schools, by and large, are pretty good. I can tell you that from experience. Yeah, I've got my problems with Ofsted, and we'll beat them, don't worry. We'll beat them. We'll beat them, I assure you. It'll take time, but we will not give in. But our schools are still good, and we should remember that, ladies and gentlemen. When you're sitting down at your next Friday night and your child's complaining, you tell your child, maybe share some of the stories that you've heard tonight about children who do something and have to go through Theresienstadt or Nazi Germany in order to get a Jewish education. And if we can do that, we will all grow up much more optimistically, we will be happier, and we'll feel that our children are actually getting a pretty good deal. Thank you for your attention.